You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
It's Monday evening, and you're listening to Joe and Gemma on the Supernaturelle show.
Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of the Supernaturelle show. You are joined by myself, Gemma, and tonight I have the lovely, very annoying, very off-putting Dr. Cal Cooper. Hi, Cal. How are you? Look, he's trying to be dead when he's making out that I can't hear him now.
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, stop playing with your microphone. We'll be able to hear you then. Oh, God, everybody, I apologise in advance for how tonight's show is going to go, because with this one, you never quite know what you're going to get. I mean, this weekend, for example, classic example, a lovely weekend, out enjoying a lovely G&T I was, and then the conversation went to tiramisu and custard creams. Cal, what have you got to say for that?
Nothing wrong with tiramisu or a bit of creme brulee now and then.
Creme brulee, have you changed it?
The top.
Okay, right, so just move your mic up a little bit because I can hardly hear you.
Beg your pudding. There we go.
That's better. Hi, Cal, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you, darling. You had a good week?
Yeah, it's not been bad. A lot of stuff to do, all preparation underway. Certainly a minute from Dr. David Saunders, who some people might know for his research on lucid dreaming and survival after death, because we're like the last two people to try and prep and get to the Parapsychology Association convention in Paris this weekend. I think most people are out there already. We're not travelling till like Thursday, which is the day that it starts, so we're the kind of last minute tag-alongs.
So you've left it till last minute to prepare?
No, I mean, the university has, but we've been so busy with different things, and the university kind of organises your travel and stuff like that, but they've been messing about with it, and we've been dealing with all kinds of paperwork and admin and stuff to follow that up. But it should be good. Big turnout. Some fantastic papers have been submitted to the convention, and I think they've had some mini kind of conferences beforehand, which is why some people have gone so early. So some people are studying clinical parapsychology as well. At some kind of private invitation talks beforehand, but looking forward to getting out there. It should be really good, and I think the weather's going to be really hot out there as well. There was reports that France in particular is going to be stifling hot, so that should be interesting.
That's it, just ruin it for everybody now. I mean, just pop on about the weather, why don't you?
Or join in.
Well, yeah, we'll all just pop over.
Please do.
Yeah, because it's that easy. So, Carl, right, before we get on to the nitty gritty, can you just give the listeners just a brief overview of who you are and what you do?
I could do, yeah. I'm Dr. Cal Cooper. I'm based at the University of Northampton and a visiting researcher for Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm based there as a lecturer in the Faculty of Health and Society, and one of the research units I'm involved with at Northampton is called Exceptional Experiences and Consciousness Studies, which involves researchers involved in parapsychology, transpersonal psychology, consciousness studies, cognitive sciences, and neuroscience as well. And my main emphasis within that is on parapsychology. I lead the third year module. So if people come to the university and do a psychology degree, in their third year, when you get to pick different modules to take to create whatever kind of degree suits you and your course of study, you can pick parapsychology. And so I lead that module, and I do research there and supervise dissertations through to doctorates on it as well.
So I'm probably really going to upset, but I think it's got to be done. So how does your parapsychology course differ from the online version?
What's the online version?
You know, you 20 questions, do it in 10 minutes, and you get a little certificate to say you're a parapsychologist.
Well, first of all, anyone that does that will get outed instantly by the parapsychology community, because everyone knows each other in parapsychology. We're such a small knit unit of people. There's probably only a handful of us that are kind of full-time paid. I consider myself a full-time paid parapsychologist through the institutions. And then the rest either did it in their later careers or after they retired and were full-time academics and even dabbled during the later part of their careers. So everyone knows each other. I have bumped into a few people before that have done these courses. Some people that I knew long before they did them. And then they would do some very dangerous things like, putting websites up and calling themselves anything from parapsychologist to doctor and things like that, but then trying to endorse genuine people, which would look bad on them. And some people get really kind of drawn into these online things saying, but it's accredited. Well, who's the accrediting body? Well, it's this. But you do realize they've made that accrediting body up. It's another organization of theirs that's owned by another one and back to them again. So it's a whole triangle of nonsense, really. And also, who taught you that? Who taught the course? Who led it? Again, it's a nobody or someone who has no background in it either. And so they're really kind of easy to out. I don't think you may as well just go out and buy yourself, a case of a dozen bottles of Plonk that's really nice for the money that you spend on that instead. There's other options. Go to a conference and listen to talks. Or if people say, well, I haven't got the money for a university degree, that's why I did it there. The other option? Just read a book. You will get so much more respect from having a head full of knowledge because you've just read the books. Go on Amazon. I'm always searching on Amazon and ABE books and stuff like that. I never accept the price that I find.
Books is amazing, isn't it?
Where do you think I get most of this stuff from? And I never accept the first price. Something's been there for ages and I've been watching it. I'll message them and I'll say, how about this for it? And I'll take these off your hands as well. I'll always haggle and try and get the best possible deal out of it as well. But, Amazon, most of the time you'll get books for a penny and then plus postage. There's no excuse. A penny is nothing compared to the £500 to £1,000 people might be charged for doing these paper mill certificates that are accredited by nothing, produced by nobody. And if people turned up at conferences with these stating that they were everything from a parapsychologist to doctor, people would say, fantastic, which university are you at? Because we didn't know you or where you... And they can't link themselves to an institution, or if they can, it's this online body. Some of them have gone through a lot of scrutiny and have been outed. I think Belford University was one that was even creating undergraduate courses in parapsychology. It basically create you anything that you wanted a course in. And then I think there was one that was the Institute of Forensic Parapsychology and all sorts of nonsense like that, where you could complete them at speed. Kieran O'Keefe did one on demonology to see what was involved in that. He's really interested in exorcisms and things like that. I did one years ago to see how quickly it could be completed. I think I did it within a week and got distinction on it for barely any work whatsoever. But it gave me an insider's view as well. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to use that for. There's been a lot of articles in the past
but you never know what it might come in handy for, in all fairness.
More so in terms of, I wasn't being serious on the kind of the applications, but more so the experience of what are people getting themselves in for? Because people have written on this before, who is a parapsychologist, what makes one? Because no one can stop calling themselves it. No one can be stopped calling themselves a psychologist if they want to. There is no legal grounding protecting it. It's not a protected label. Clinical parapsychologist is occupational, educational, forensic, things like that. They are registered titles, and it is illegal to go around calling yourself some of those elements of psychology, but not a psychologist and not a parapsychologist either, and many other areas of psychology, again, that don't have protected titles. Mm-hmm. Doctor as well. I heard that years gone by, you could change your name by default to doctor, professor, whatever. In more recent years, I think that's been clamped down unless you actually have the actual evidence to do so. Problem is, things like your bank and the council and things like that aren't fully qualified to know what a legitimate degree certificate is, especially if it's one that's come from America through these courses. So you've probably got some of these people that do them and then head to their bank, la-di-da, stop calling me Mrs. or Mr., I'm doctor. Please change my bank cards, please change my checkbook. And it gets really silly. And because then they've got a 9 till 5 job and they're calling themselves doctor and they were never at a university and they have no day-to-day use of that title and they're not involved with any institution whatsoever, any way to make use of that knowledge, which they don't have, because when you ask them about the subject, they fall to pieces anyway and crumble because they've not been involved.
Yeah, because they don't actually know. I mean, I'm not going to lie, Carl. I did one.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did a parapsychology course online. It was one of these pay £50, £60 become a parapsychologist. So I didn't do it thinking I'm going to be a parapsychologist after reading this and completing this paperwork. So don't panic. I didn't think for 2 minutes that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
It was more purely out of interest because I wanted to see what it was all about and what actually goes into these courses. So a bit like Kieran, really, and a bit like yourself. So I literally paid for this course and whizzed through it in about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
It took no effort, no brain power, and it was multiple choice. I've never done an exam that's for a parapsychologist or a diploma with multiple choice. So I was quite surprised. I was like, okay, I don't have to write a whole pamphlet of information. All I've got to do is pick A, B or C. So off I popped and I passed 100%. So does that make me a parapsychologist?
There was someone that did that for dental surgery, and it was an online multiple choice thing, and they got the qualification, and somehow a dental surgery had taken this person on, and they've been practicing for months on the back of no experience and just doing an online qualification before they got caught out, fired, and then legal proceedings followed as well. The amount of people that go out and do the bogus qualifications because they say, I didn't have the time, I didn't have the money, but I genuinely wanted to be involved in that. It's not just limited to parapsychology, but certainly being involved in the field, I'm aware of these phony ones turning up, but I think every field's got its unusual kind of online things out there. I've heard some strange excuses as well when people try to defend it. When they mention even through to doctorates in parapsychology, and they say, well, there's no such thing as these qualifications anyway, that they'll use that as a defense. There's only one doctorate ever in parapsychology, and that was Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, because it says so on his degree certificate. I'm like, but that's the United States, and every university has its own exams office within the university, and then they decide how they want to print their degree certificate. So both of my PhDs don't list a subject. One of them, both of them do the exact same thing. They're both from two different institutions, but British ones. My one from Northampton lists what the title was regards a project that was on thanatology, and my Manchester one lists the title of my thesis that was on parapsychology. But the first one doesn't say thanatology within the thesis title. It just says what the thesis was. Successfully defended a thesis entitled blah, 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 blah. And the other one is a body of work or portfolio entitled blah, 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 blah. So unless you actually want to put the subject somehow sneakily within your thesis title, it's never going to just list an actual subject. But it might do in some US or other places throughout the world, their own doctorates, where it doesn't want to say what the thesis was that you defended in a research degree. It would just say broadly what that discipline was, which is very unusual because it's more so it's kind of the right thing to do with a research degree. To say you did a body of research for so many years on a specific thing, and this is what you defended, not the entire topic, parapsychology. You defended this kind of aspect of parapsychology you were looking at. So it's a very strange defense, and I think Jeffrey's heard that kind of brought up against him a few times. He has mentioned that he's the only person to kind of have that on his degree certificate, but it is unique that I think it was the University of California or something like that, somewhere within there. It's weird how they've just listed that, but it's a unique instance.
It's very.
I'm
not going to lie. I think you've just made me and 90% of people in the chat room absolutely terrified of ever going to the dentist again, Cal. So on behalf of the UK, thanks for that.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Anybody in the chat room that is no longer scared to go to a dentist, please just appear now. So the parapsychology. When you're doing your courses, because you lecture in parapsychology now, so when you're doing the courses, how in depth are they? What is it exactly that you're looking for from your students?
As a third year module, they've already gone through 2 years. We hope by the second year they've been involved in all the other topics. We will introduce parapsychology early on, especially in research methods, because I think talking about the Zener cards, so your star, your cross, your wavy lines, your circle, your square, and looking at how you can calculate probability is a really good early way of teaching research methods, and how throughout anything that we study with human behavior, we can look at how much is something occurring beyond what chance expects. And that is how a lot of social sciences work with their quantitative studies. So they've already had a bit of an introduction by the time they get to the third year. And then when they get to us, we do a general introduction about what is parapsychology and what are you getting yourself in for with this module. And we do say, if reading masses amount of literature and also going into the history isn't for you, this might not be for you because there is a lot of reading to do. There's more history to parapsychology than you'll find on the internet. And what is on there is extremely skewed anyway. We already know the issues behind that. If no one does, there's a fantastic book that's just about to be updated through White Crow Books, but it's by Craig Wheeler called Psy Wars, regarding TED, Wikipedia, and the battle for the internet. But we teach them the broad issues and the issues with the internet in recent years on arguing it. And the first term, so all the way up until Christmas, we talk about spontaneous phenomena. So it'll be everything from ESP in the real world, precognitive events, talking about how people have researched disasters through to 9/11 and the tsunami, when people have dreamt or had foresight of something before it's happened, and how early studies would look at surveys on that, through to ghosts and hauntings, mediumship, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. I've more recently brought in a whole lecture on reincarnation phenomena and looking at the early work of Ian Stevenson. And then in the second term, after Christmas, the second part of the module is all about the Rhine Revolution. So we go from psychical research and parapsychology's later dealings, and then backtrack again to how did it go from field work to the Rhine saying enough of the field work, we've been duped by mediums enough times, and them seemingly being fraudulent in some instances that made us quite annoyed, and some controversies like Mina Crandon, which caused a split up of the American Society for Psychical Research through to the Boston branch. They went to Duke University. William McDougall, the dean, helped take them over there and say, look, we can set up a lab for psychical research. I want you guys to kind of lead that. We teach that, how they decided to create a structured methodology for testing ESP and psychokinesis in the laboratory, and their work then started to stem out to other universities throughout the States and then throughout the world, saying, look, this is what we're doing. Here's the standard method that we've got that seems pretty legitimate for testing ESP. We're not saying that we are measuring what we seem to be measuring, but we'd like you to actually give us feedback. You do it yourselves as psychologists, as physicists, and submit papers back. That was after they've been publishing in various widely known journals, Journal of Abnormal Psychology and things like that. And then they established their own journal, the Journal of Parapsychology, in 1937. So they had an in-house journal that would purely deal with it, so they get more focus and more people paying attention to it. Late 1950s, they set up the Parapsychological Association thanks to it. And by 1969, I think it was, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they brought the Parapsychological Association in as an affiliate of the AAAS. So it is officially, by that point, considered a science that needs to be paid attention to, because it's an affiliate member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and it still stands today. So that's what the course is about.
I was going to sign up then, Cal, but to be honest, I think I'll just sit with my books.
It takes it steady. I mean, it's 22 lectures.
It sounds pretty full on, in all fairness.
It is.
But then when you break it down, I suppose it's not as intense as.
Even then, though, we don't have enough time in each lecture to cover the history of, because it's one lecture on precognition. It's 2 lectures on ghosts and hauntings, because that's a hell of a lot. But even then, we're trying to cover it in 2 hours. One lecture on poltergeist, one on media, and it just goes on like that. But
even with that hour, do you not sometimes think that that's just not enough?
Well, it follows through to a seminar where we do a practical topic. So they do the lecture and then they instantly go to their second hour, which is something aside from the lecture. It's a seminar where it's a research seminar. They get into smaller groups. It's a 1/3 of the lecture class, and then they'll do something practical where they're reading transcripts from mediums, or they're watching a documentary and an associated article and trying to discuss cold reading and Barnum scripts and what they think about it. Or later on, they're doing ESP tests and things like that, and they're trying to actually work out the significance level from it as well.
Cal, you are not going to believe this has just been asked, but
go on.
This is a serious question that has been asked in the chat room. Is there a most haunted module?
No, there's ghosts and hauntings, and we do talk about the popularization of the media. I had one student that was showing clips of Most Haunted to people, and a few other TV shows to look at how much the lay people that were watching it considered. She was my student Kim Thomas. She was making a comparison between shows that were showing more of the gadgets and relying on the gadgets compared to those that were relying more on the medium, to see were people portraying this as actual scientific investigation,
which they are, because they will quite openly say so themselves. That you hear it all the time. Every single time there is a Facebook Live from a team out there, they will say, I am using this bit of equipment because this piece of equipment is scientific proof of a ghost. Okay, so how is that scientific proof of a ghost? Well, it gives you an increase of EMF, right? Okay, so how is that related to a ghost?
Mm-hmm.
What are you looking for, Cal?
I had an EMF meter behind me on the shelf, but I must have moved it somewhere else because it's not there. I was just glancing.
But did you move it, or did that move itself?
To be honest, you've seen how many books there are. It's probably buried under them. So
yeah,
it's just very natural.
Speaking of books, Cal, it must have been an absolute great honour to be asked to write the foreword in psychotherapy.
It was more than just that. I mean, it was an honour to write the foreword and have Stan Krippner do it with me as well. I mean, Stan Krippner is an absolute legend of parapsychology. I don't even know how many books Stan has out. And beyond that, I don't even know how many papers in different disciplines Stan has. He has so many awards and accolades. It's unreal. And early last month when I was in San Francisco, I had the pleasure of spending some time with him and catching up on this.
Didn't you go to the theatre?
We went to the theatre. We did. We went to see Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's really good. We had lunch beforehand, and God bless him. He's so kind, and he has a lot of time for people. And I just don't know how he keeps up. He's constantly travelling the world and lecturing. He's just got so much to give and so much important history behind him. He's a really, really important figure for us. So I was so glad that he wanted to write the foreword with me, because we are working on a book regarding sexual behaviour and love and psychic phenomena, because there's a lot of that in different areas.
Yes, that's something else that I was going to get onto later. Do you know you're a nightmare to interview, because you go off on a tangent and then you just ruin the structure of my interview.
I'm going to stick to science psychotherapy.
It's too late now. You've done it now. So you've brought us onto the subject of sexual behaviour. So how does sexual behaviour impact on the world of the paranormal?
I'll come back to it. Let me go back to science.
So we're going back to sci. Okay.
Pleasure to write it with Stan, the forward. I will come back to that question. I'm holding it in my head. So pleasure to write it with Stan. Professor Adrian Parker from the University of Gothenburg did the afterword. But science psychotherapy was finished in 1985 with Alex Tannis, Elaine Swinge, and Andrew Bambrick. And for some reason, wherever it got to in the editorial stages, it never saw publication. There was a book by Alex Tannis that did shortly after he died, which is called Dream, Symbols and Psychic Power with Timothy Gray. And that was published some 3 years after he passed away. But Alex had several manuscripts that never got finished. And this one I thought really important because we have so much more involvement with clinical parapsychology now. Forget measuring the phenomena and whether it, what its ontology is, what truth do we actually have to the phenomena we're studying, what impact does it have on people when they experience it, how good is it for your health and well-being. So this book, Science Psychotherapy, is about people that were going for psychotherapy, but Elaine Swinge had seen Alex doing work as a psychic healer and said, how would you fare being in the psychotherapy setting? She was a medical doctorate, she was a psychotherapist and psychiatrist, and so she was administering medication following the psychotherapy settings, but she wanted Alex to be there to give a reading about why that person had issues in the first place before they'd said anything. So it was kind of skipping the psychotherapy route where we'd sit down and have that psychotherapy session with someone. He was just jumping straight to the root cause by using ESP. And it lists several case studies where he was doing this, and they seem to be really successful and very distinct from each other as well. So for our counselling psychologists, our psychotherapists at the university, and many others, we thought it'd be really good to get this manuscript out to the modern day, but we sandwiched it between a modern forward and a modern afterward to say, what does modern day science actually make of this? Because the manuscript alone is very, I think if it was published as it was, it'd be very dangerous because it's talking about things in 1985 that wouldn't happen now. So we've updated it, said, how does it stand today? Why is it important as a historical piece?
Exactly. I mean, I've read it. I've got it here. Took it back off my shelf earlier because I knew you was coming on, and obviously I wanted to reread your forwards before you came on. And I'm not going to lie, it's a very interesting book. If anybody's not read it yet, it is definitely worth a read. Like you say, it's the contrast between what was then and how things would be done now. And for me, that's the bit that really that grips me and gets my interest, because imagine being back in that time and having to do things that way, and how far that science has progressed since.
Mm-hmm.
That for me is just phenomenal. But I mean, books, if we're just talking about books at the minute, I'm not sure if it's available on Audible. What's Audible? Is that
something that makes a sound?
Is that like it reads to you? No, you don't want it. You don't want a book read to you. You need to pick it up and read it.
Well, that would be me picking up the book and doing a recording of my voice, I guess, reading it through. It would be an audiobook that way, or someone else.
No, I think that's what the question is in the chat room.
Sorry. I thought
yeah, easy there, Tiger. I mean, by all means, if you want to pick it up and read it to us, if you want to read it, feel free, Cal. We're not going to mind.
I don't think I could do it in an hour.
We are only here for an hour, though. Just saying.
I don't think I'd be anything like Stephen Fry reading Harry Potter either.
But going back to books, I mean, you've got a few books out yourself, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
So, Telephone Calls from the Dead?
Yeah, that's become quite rare now, because I haven't released a Kindle of it. That should really be done just to preserve the original one. And it's really due an update. So I've seen on Amazon, I think the cheapest one's about £150.
Mm-hmm.
Every single copy of it that was ever printed is out there now.
I did actually ask Cal off air, everybody listening, his library that is behind him just looks absolutely phenomenal, and I'm sure he's got a copy of that book on that shelf somewhere. And I have just asked him if I could borrow a book, and I was quite interestingly told that it is not, and I repeat, it is not a lending library.
No.
So Telephone Calls from the Dead, yeah, you definitely need to get an updated version of that out.
It could do another 4 or 5 chapters in there and bits of rewrites of some of the existing chapters.
Yeah.
But I'm working on 3 or 4 other things, actually. I mean, I've been pressured so much for the first PhD work on bereavement experiences to get a book out on that and positive psychology. Saw you rolling your eyes there. I saw it. And then I'm working on a biography for D. Scott Rogo about his life, his work, and then his tragic murder. And there was a brilliant autobiography of Alex Tannis with him and Harvey Ardman, but I'd like to do a biography of him as well, because Fred Frolick and Polly Bonnell, they started doing some research on him for the Alex Tannis Foundation, which was all biographical work, and it just stopped. They were just gathering it for preservation. But a lot of that needs updating. I need to go and interview more people and then speak to Polly and Fred. And all 3 of us perhaps get together and do a really extended biography, because there's so much more on Alex that he didn't list in his own book. And that came out in 1976. Yeah. So there was another 14 years of his research and unusual phenomena that was reported.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
I'm just looking at the chat room. Sorry. People are just commenting that very interesting book, considering the use of ESP to help gauge situations in therapy. It's true.
Well, a lot of therapists do. I mean, when we last had Rupert Sheldrake at the university, I got 2 colleagues in there. One was Claire Green, who is one of our in-house counselling psychologists, Dr. Claire Green. And then Amanda Charles turned up, and she was at the Parapsychological Association in Athens a couple of years ago. She's not associated with us, but she is a counselling psychologist. And Amanda claims mediumistic abilities, and Claire was very sceptical when she came into counselling psychology. But when Rupert said something that made me mention that I was just about to bring out science psychotherapy, and I explained what it was, and then both of them made a comment to Rupert and me that more so Claire, she said she went into counselling very sceptical of counselling and very standoffish and objective when it came to working with clients. And she said, unless Amanda had said something first, but Claire said, if I had a feeling about a client, if I had a dream about them, I realised that if I incorporated it into the counselling session and talked about it, it worked really well. They gained so many more benefits from it, or sometimes it will weirdly be right. And Amanda had said this from square one, because she wants to work on this idea of empathy or telepathic empathy. And she said, again, the only reason she feels that her counselling sessions have worked is by being this kind of intuitive, empathic counsellor towards the person they're working with. If they build a wall between them, trying to actually keep that separation, this professional level, it didn't seem to work. But inside that professional setting, inside that room, bring down the barriers. Once you leave the room, let them down. But if you have an intuitive feeling, if you have a dream, maybe make a note of it and wait till the next session to bring it up again. You can still step away from the client when you're out of the room. And so this is really interesting. They're not making the direct claim that Alex is, but they're still saying, as counselling psychologists, as psychotherapists, intuitive feelings and incorporating them seems to work really well.
Mm-hmm. But it does anyway. You know that on a personal level, the more open you are with somebody anyway, the likelihood is they're going to be open with you back. So surely that goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, there's another level of it as well. I mean, I was presenting recently at the in-house University of Northampton conference. I was talking about what we were doing with flotation tanks and telepathy. And there's a guy presenting after me who I'd never met before called Robin. Dr. Glenn Hitchman, who I sat with, had spoken to him before, and he said, Robin's really interested in parapsychology. And Robin's doing a DProf Prac, a Doctor of Professional Practice, in social work. And he's been a social worker for quite some time. But his thesis is on intuition in social work. And he said, I didn't realize that what I had a hunch on wanting to do has so many links to parapsychology. But I'll describe what I'm talking about. And he mentioned instances of going to check out a home and having just a really uncomfortable feeling, even though there was nothing wrong with the home and there was nothing directly wrong with the family, but he just felt awful for some reason, and it turned out to be correct. And it only ever turns out to be correct when he's got this unusual feeling that he acts on. Or sometimes he's been in the house and realized, I think someone's watching me. Even though I can see everyone, someone is watching me. Something's not right. And he's discovered that some people were hiding in the house that were, under police caution not to be in there with that family. Some member that had been told not to go there because harassment or whatever. And he had this intuitive feeling that someone was watching them. And he went and snooped around the house and found them hiding behind a door or other things like that. And so as a social worker, he said acting on instinct, acting on intuition really helped him in terms of, making the social setting a lot better. And if he had this uncomfortable feeling, it meant he needed to act on something.
I think a lot of people tend to try and pass off their initial gut reaction to some things. I think you do just try and brush over it. I think that is just the way of life these days. I know, because I've worked for a lot of years in mainly in advanced dementia. So these poor people that I've been working with or had been working with for years was... Bless them, the little heads were all over. There was here, there and everywhere. Very, very confused. But they would have moments where there was extremely lucid. And the information that you would gain from them during those periods was phenomenal. And a lot of people tend to brush over that. There was like, but how do you know that they're being lucid?
Yeah.
And it was like, put yourself in their position. So on an average day, they have no idea what day of the week it is. They have absolutely no idea what they had for breakfast, what they're doing there, who we are. So on that rare moment when you're getting a full story from beginning to end, you have to believe it. And I think it's just so easy to brush over vital information, which brings me on to another point. Research methods.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you're obviously, you like your research to be done properly.
Yeah, it is nice when that happens.
It is very nice when that happens. Define the correct research method for me, because I think a lot of people tend to fail in that area. So what would you, as a lecturer and a doctor, say is the proper research method?
The first thing that springs to mind is Ghostbusters and Dean Yeager turning up and kicking them out of the department because their latest grant didn't go through, because if you watch the deleted scenes, Peter flopped on one of the last presentations of what they were doing and they relied on him. And he said, I demand an explanation. And he says, well, it's quite simple. Your theories are of the worst popular tripe. Your methods are sloppy and your conclusions are highly questionable. You are a poor scientist, Dr. Venkman. And he says, oh, but the kids love us. Or he says something like, I see. And just leaves it there.
I see.
Doesn't even put up a fight. I see.
Oh, no. Fair play. I'll stop the bus now.
It's structure. I mean, Rhine was desperately looking, Rhine and J.B. Rhine and Louisa Rhine, they were desperately looking for structure because they wanted psychical research to be accepted as a science. Certainly at the University of London, Harry Price had gained some recognition with there being a council for psychical research at the University of London, but it wasn't incorporated as any formal study. Duke University was really kind of setting the standards for that. And it was great that they were giving a whole lab to do that, thanks to the work of William McDougall. He was writing many standard textbooks on psychology at the time. And all they were doing to that point was field investigations and observations of human behavior, but early psychology was basically that anyway. We didn't really get any proper structure to qualitative research until about 1983. So that would be, how do we interview people and then analyze the transcripts? And there must be at least a dozen different ways in which you can do it, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But it's because of the Rhines that we really harness statistical science, which is so strong today in not just social sciences, but many other sciences as well. Especially when it comes to drug trials.
Mm-hmm.
But the Rhines, they'd had these issues with mediums. They'd had this major issue with Mina Crandon, who, long story short, had been offering sexual favors in the seance room to researchers for a good report. And they were coming out about it, but there were other researchers that were fully aware that she was doing this and wanted nothing to do with it. And that's what caused the divide and the establishment of the Boston Society for Psychic Research that the Rhines moved over to. Until everything kind of settled down and a lot of people moved back to the ASPR. But they got Carl Zener involved. They moved away from just using standard decks of cards to this 5-symbol set, which meant that you had 5 of every symbol in every pack, 25 to every pack. Your chance of guessing the symbols out of a pack of 25 is 5 in 25. Mm-hmm. It allows you a standard deviation of 1, so you could get 6, maybe 7, and it's still not quite that interesting. But once you start to get to 8 or more, and repeatedly, that's really interesting. And you wouldn't just do 25, people were doing hundreds, at least 100. So 4 times over is enough to get you something that's quite nice, a nice statistical rounded figure to actually look at statistical significance. And this is what they were doing. They were setting a standard of a method, like a good recipe, where you could then hand that to the next university and people understood the method and the form of analysis. And it was very, very easy to follow and understand. All they had to do was what are you testing and why. So it's like a good cookery book. If I've got a good one, then I can do it and copy any recipe and hand it to you, and you can do the same. And you should
I won't go that far, Cal.
But if you follow the instructions,
if you like everything char grilled, then I'm your girl.
There's Gordon Ramsay saying, if it's brown, it's cooked. If it's black, it's. But we'll leave it there. But it's a standard method, so passing it on, you should, roughly get something that has followed the same thing, and then we'll see what the outcome is as well. And that's what a good method is. Nowadays as well, we've upped the ante, things are always upping. We want to know that if people have gone out interviewing people, they've done what's called a reflexivity. If you're going to interview people, put on the table your own biases. What do you understand of the subject in the first place? Where do you stand? Where are your beliefs? Put that in your research report, because it'll make a big difference in understanding why the people you interviewed said what they said based on what they know of you, or just based on how you've analysed it because of what you believe. If it comes
Which brings to belief systems. Belief systems impact so much on the paranormal world, without a doubt. It's huge. Even down to... I love it when my head does this. It just goes on vacation and comes back like a week later. Who was I reading about recently?
Mary Shelley.
No.
Donald Trump.
No. It's a good job this isn't Xenocad, isn't it? Because you'd have failed right off.
Timmy Mallet. Back to him again.
I'll come back to that because it'll catch up with me.
Chris Akabusi. Chris Akabusi is.
No, it will come back to me before the end of the show. I can guarantee it.
No,
stop it, Cal. Tell me about your free abstracts that you've put in for the SPR conference this year.
I bet that's from Ashley.
No, it's not. It's from me. It's on my list.
Two of them are student projects. One is looking at the psychology of dogmatic skepticism. So not normal skepticism, dogmatic. It's also another way of saying pseudo-skeptics. Another one on looking at childhood experiences of anomalous phenomena. And so those are the two student projects that I've submitted. And then there's another one on a big project that we've got going with a scientific and medical network that is furthering the work that we're doing of death communications. So we just did a massive survey for that, an English, a French, and a Spanish questionnaire. And it was out for maybe about 9 months or so. And by the time we finished, we got 1,005 respondents. It was a 45-minute questionnaire to fill in. It was very long, a lot of clicking, ticking of boxes, and a lot of typing to do about the experiences. So throughout those 3 different languages, we're really pleased that we got 1,005, because the last big survey that was done on this was by Dewi Rees as a medical doctorate, 1971, and I think he collected 293 participants. So we've really surpassed what he did. His was the kind of standard for understanding these, and is still widely referenced today. We've upped it.
See, that surprises me that you got that many, because I think a lot of people, I had this conversation recently, actually, depending on what the questionnaire is being put out there for, will determine who and how many people fill them in. So if I was to put a questionnaire out there for, I don't know, a TV show, I think the responses for that would be phenomenal. Whereas for something that's quite academic, you get a lot less replies. And I think the majority of the reason for that is because people are scared. People are quite intimidated because they think that it's academic, it's going to be difficult to do. So they tend to try and shy away from it. Pretty much the same as the SPR, because I know that you're quite heavily involved in the SPR. And I think a lot of people in the paranormal field are quite intimidated by the SPR because they have this concept of what it's actually like.
In terms of what?
Like old men suits. Very structured, very boring, as it is.
Formal establishment of looking at this as a science. I mean, before that, you had the Ghost Club and the College of Psychic Studies. They beat them by about a year, and they're still there in London. But in 1882, Trinity College, Cambridge, decided to kind of do something about the spiritualist movement and say, let's do something. So Frederick Myers, Frank Podmore, Henry Sidgwick, they all got together, and there was the establishment of the SPR. A couple of years later, in an attempt to debunk what the SPR was doing, was the American SPR, with one of the founders being William James, so a really prominent psychologist. But they realized that they were trying to apply is now called anomalistic psychology and look for conventional explanations, and there are a lot, but they'd come across some unique instances where it didn't seem they were applying. So they thought, well, actually, maybe the SPR isn't that loony. They've actually got something to this, and there's actually something to look into. So then they became really good collaborators across the pond, really.
I've not seen any of your talks yet at the SPR, but I've been a few times now, and it is actually quite understandable for your average Joe blog. So I personally think that more people should be getting involved and visiting the SPR. Where do you stand on that, and what sort of people would you encourage to come to the SPR, and how do you think that they could improve their people through the door?
Anybody. I mean, it was always the case. The main council was always built up of academics or people that just had a massive vested interest, and that's the same today. I'm on the council, and there's higher up people, elected members and vice presidents, and Professor Chris Rowe is the current president. We have meetings every couple of months, but that council is made up of, there's a lot of academics there, or retired academics as well, but there's some people in there that have been London barristers or are journalists, and they're just well read on the topic. So everyone sitting around the table is a doctoral professor. They just come from their own background, and there's someone that could argue the case of parapsychology just as well as I could, because they're so well read on the topic, and that's why they're council members. But the general membership has always been everything from And we get it every time, because every time we have a council meeting, we get a new list of who the latest people are that have signed up for membership. They're everything from students to retired individuals, people that have had a 9 to 5 job, your civil servant, your people in theology, religious representatives, through to academics. You name it, anyone seems to join the SPR. For a variety of reasons: childhood interest, personal experiences, wanting to get in it when they worked in academia, but it was frowned upon, so they've done it after retirement. And when you are a member, the benefits are numerous. You get to be involved in this community, see the latest research, use the lending library, discounts at conferences. A lending library, not mine, their lending library. And talks are free, I think, every month if you're a member anyway. You just walk through the door, you sit down, you do the lecture, have your tea, coffee and biscuits and mingle. So there you go.
And it is really friendly as well, isn't it? I mean, on a lunchtime, you retire off to the pub over the road, go and have a drink, some lunch, chat. In all fairness, I've been a few times, like I said, and let's just go back to the library. If I could move into that library, and Ashley Nibb is in the chat room, and yes, Ashley, just like Carl, the SPR's library is a lending library. But that library is phenomenal. Like, and the chairs, I could just literally go, sit in there and not move. Mm-hmm. Just do not disturb. Pass me a brew every once in a while and I'll be happy.
Rocking chair just there.
Oh, look at that.
And my Chesterfield rocking chair. Right in front of the fireplace as well. I mean, it's a lovely, all picturesque right in front of there.
It actually really is.
I know. So it's kind of like the SPR. It's like a Nottingham branch of it.
All round to Cal's to sit and read books.
Oh, there's not space. No. It's like the broom closet of CBBC with Ed the Duck. It's just not got that space. But it is like that. It's brilliant, the SPR library. And what you've seen, that's only a fraction of it, because they have to look at
the lexicon as well, because you've got the lexicon alongside that.
So, lexicon, there's online access to the journals, the proceedings, but they only keep in that library that you've seen on the top floor what things, so the main books, the journals that they do have in the lower cases are on display. They'll keep the main SPR stuff, but the other ones, they will look at what is currently being used and regularly used. And if it doesn't get used regularly, it goes off to Cambridge University Library, which members can also visit as well, which is another benefit. If you're a member of the SPR, you can let Cambridge Library know that you're coming for the day, and they'll give you a free pass and a coupon to go and get yourself tea or coffee, and you can go and peruse the older stuff. You can look at Franek Kaluski's
Cambridge University is absolutely stunning.
It's beautiful.
Anyway.
You'll have it's worth a couple of days there, at least one day to check out the library, and then the next day to just wander around the town and take in the sights and go punting, things like that.
Don't think you'd get me out the library. Well, you might get me out the library to sit on the grass if it's sunny. That'll be about it.
It's not an hour's job. I mean, even when I've just gone to the SPR library, if I've gone there and it's not a council meeting, I've gone there for a purpose, and it means that I need to do some trawling through the books. So I've gone there, I've done my lunchtime at the pub, and then I've come back over again and taking a stack of books off the shelf, one by one, looking through them, making notes, putting them back again. It's like when I was in San Francisco and I had to go through Scott Rogo's material at the Californian Institute of Integral Studies, and there were 42 boxes of his material. And I thought, God, I don't know if I can do this in 3 days, from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. And I just made it through in time. I got to the final box and it was audio tapes, and I skimmed through them. And there was a lot of skimming, but I think I found most of what I needed. That they've done over 1,000 pages or so.
Skimming through it, could you not have missed vital information?
Probably, yeah. But I mean, I've become so used to being a really old school scholar, where most students now are just thinking Google Scholar has everything on it. And believe me, it doesn't. Most of the stuff I've got sat behind me here is not digitized. It does not exist in electronic format. I've got an entire series over there of Fate magazine that goes from 1948 every month to present day. Later on, it died down. But I've just gone through them again. More so from 1967, every month, to look for stuff that Scott Rogo did to build up a biography. So I'm so used to just scanning pages, looking for a specific name or a specific word, because there's no index, or there's no digitized version of it, or digitized index where you can just type it and ask for search. You've got to do it manually. But that's what scholars were doing for ages to actually build things. You've just got to get used to the books, and also used to the technique of your eyes scanning down a page.
It's like doing a word search, right?
Absolutely, it is pretty much like that. And if you know what you're looking for, handy if it's a name because you're looking for that capital letter jumping out. But other times, you're training your brain to say, look for the sequence of letters, and you don't have to look through every sentence. You're just going straight down the middle of the page, and you can go pretty fast doing that. Some people might call that speed reading when they've read a book where they're just going straight down the middle. They're not going from left to right, straight down the middle, move on to the next.
You see, I would hate to do that. And I know that sounds awful, but I like to take things in. And quite often when I've got a book, when I'm sat with a book, I always have a notepad. Always.
Or I have a pencil. I make pencil notes in the book.
Yeah.
I never put a pen note in there, but I'll make pencil notes because I know that if I really need to, I'll rub it out later.
Do you fold the corners of the page?
No. I have a stack of bookmarks here. I mean, stack of bookmarks.
About to have a panic attack then.
No,
hate that. Drives me potty. We are running out of time really rapidly, and I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, we'll leave the sex research till later.
Oh, no, let's get onto that. No, let's not get onto that quite yet. Your research on death and bereavement, now this really, really, really interests me because, as I said earlier, I've spent 11 years working in care work, and I also specialise in end-of-life care. So I've spent a lot of time around a lot of people that are dying, and then as they take their last breaths, and then before they are taken to their final resting place. So your research on death and bereavement obviously grips me quite significantly because I'm like, what have you found out? I need to know what you've got. So a brief overview. I want to know it all. I want it all.
In what looks to be 9 minutes, what have you got? Sum up a doctorate. What have you got? There's so many things. The SPR, again, 1886, they produced a 2-volume piece called Phantasms of the Living. And it was a fantastic book. It was a really kind of broad analysis of apparitional experiences, some of living people as well. And hence the title. But afterwards, the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research that you can see just up there, all in the green on top, and you'll see in the SPR library, they took data from this book and reanalyzed it. So one of the papers that I looked at was from 1889. It was began by Edmund Gurney, and he died before he completed it. So Frederick Myers finished it off, and it was called On Apparitions Occurring Soon After Death. And they were noticing that in a week before someone died, so potentially when they're on their deathbed, people were having unusual experiences around them. The person dying might report seeing relatives that they once knew but are in fact dead themselves. Uniquely, when you look at modern stuff, neuropsychiatrists, people like Professor Peter Fenwick in The Art of Dying, people had visitations from dead members of their family that they didn't know were dead. Mm-hmm. They'd actually died that day or the day before, and they didn't want to tell the dying relative in case it finished done. And so the family had been like, you can't have had a visitation from your niece earlier. She didn't come to the hospital. She's been busy. Did you really just say that? And they're describing how they looked that day. It might be the exact clothes that person died in. And so there's a nice veridical instance, but they were noting that in early SPR research and then doing a few more studies on it. I suppose the next jump was 1926. William Barrett did a fantastic book called Deathbed Visions, which was pretty much talking about that, people feeling a rush in the room as people died, and apparitions, unusual smells that instantly hit them as well, traditions of keeping the window open, so on and so forth. And he also died before he finished that book as well, and it came out. And then the next big jump after that was a massive survey that was done by Carlos Osis and Linda Harrodson, started with the Parapsychology Foundation and led through to their book At the Hour of Death, but it was on experiences more so of the physicians and nurses, seeing dark figures behind someone before they were the next person in the care home to die, and many other things like that. So they're trying to categorize them. It looks like you're about to itch at saying a point, so I'll stop there.
No, not at all. Like, I've spoken to you previously about this anyway, privately. Why have you got a magnifying glass, Carl?
I don't have a magnifying glass.
Oh, God, honestly, you're so off-putting. I'm trying to be dead professional to crack on with what I'm here to do, and you're just trying to put me off every 10 seconds.
This is radio. Why do you think you can see me?
Maybe I can't. Who knows? Help. Somebody help. No, so seriously, I I've spoken to you previously about where I could obtain references to back up what I'm currently writing, because I write the odd blog, and it is the odd blog because I am not a writer by any means. But I do the odd blog. I did one on EVPs, and then I started this one because I had so many fascinating things happen during my working time that I thought, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to put this into a blog. So I started writing it. I'm now up to 20,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
It's turning into a book. How is it turning into a book? And it is all on pretty much what you've just mentioned. What you've just mentioned, I've had, I've got examples of that. I've had experiences of that, and it's fascinating.
I don't think people appreciate how extensive the research is. A lot of medical science only recognise the work of William Derry Rees, who I mentioned earlier, that 293 participants, because he published his thesis in the British Medical Journal in 1971. He summarised his thesis. And he was more or less getting parapsychology into the mainstream. So all this stuff, 1880s, people weren't paying attention because it's psychical research. Even though it had a very clear kind of application to palliative care and also medical research, medical psychology. And then...
So you have to be careful with palliative care anyway, because with palliative care comes the palliative care drugs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them can be, they can cause hallucinations. So can the actual process of the body preparing for death anyway. When you think that somebody that is especially an expected death, their body will go through a shutdown process. So that's where you get the mottled hands and feet, that the smell that people quite often mention that starts to come. It's not pretty, it's not nice. And then the nurses come along and they usually pump you full of all this medication, which will cause hallucinations. The side effects from these medications can be horrific. And then if you're in that room and you're not leaving that room, you're not looking after yourself properly, so your fluid intake's low, because dehydration is massive when it comes to hallucinations.
Yep.
Is it that these things are happening as somebody is approaching the end stage of their life, or is it that everybody is just so run down that your mind runs away with you?
Well, I think a lot of these experiences, like I mentioned with William Barrett, they kind of predate palliative care and also the introductions of the various drugs that we have now to actually ease someone's passing. So they were reported even then. It just depends what they're actually stating the hallucination to be. If it's something, some strange purple monster or something like that, we can't really relate to it. But if it's, a relative and they come with a specific message and that message appears to be something quite true that they didn't know about, again, we call that veridical information. Or if there's other people in the room that are experiencing it as well, then that's what we call a collective case. And it's not just the dying that's going through it. The people that are undergoing anticipatory bereavement, they're having that same experience. We could say it's some sort of aspect of group conformity. A lot of the early researchers of the SPR believed that when you saw an apparition of the dead, it wasn't because it was evidence for survival of death. It was some sort of group telepathic experience, and it's being generated by the living. And once you're dead, that's it. And so we have a lot of similar overlaps there. I'd just say that if you're aware that the dying are on medication, be wary of what it is they're reporting. It'd have to be something quite substantial to be of interest to parapsychology in that sense. Otherwise, it's just under the banner of thanatology that looks at death, dying, and bereavement. Or also the bereaved, or the people that are about to become bereaved. What experiences are they having at the point that the person's dying, at the point that they die, and then afterwards as well? Because they're not necessarily on medication for that. And separation anxiety isn't really known to cause things such as hallucinations, not to the extent that we get reported, where people are seeing full-blown apparitions, sometimes with other people that aren't suffering that loss, or movements of objects as well. They seem to go way beyond that hallucination.
Well, as I say, been there, done that. I've seen it so many times, it's unreal. Which was why I decided to start writing this blog. That's definitely not going to be a blog.
We'll do it in several parts. There's so much to it, and it is important stuff because it really does help people. I mean, that they people appreciate it when you mentioned it with the SPR. Do people find it intimidating? Why would people fill in a survey on these experiences? Because they realise that there are professionals out there that want to know.
Where people like myself and Kerry and Ashley, you know, we come along and we write our blogs. And I mean, my EVP one was incredible, but I took a lot of time over that. Kerry's done some blogs recently, and again, they're phenomenal. The work that Ashley puts out there, let's not give him a big head, but you know, his work's great too. It's phenomenal. These pieces of work that these people are putting out there for people to read and learn from. It shouldn't be underestimated.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm not underestimating what you've written. I'm sure it's lovely.
Oh, it is. Right.
But
anyway,
in several parts, it's good because it's disseminating the actual research. You're putting in your own experiences, your own point of view to it as well, and you're giving those citations for people to follow it up for themselves as well. And it's just the way it goes, really. People underestimate how much is actually out there, and it's not actually easy to keep that word count down. There's more to write on than you think.
I know. I'm suffering with it right now, Cal. But with it in regards to death and dying, there is a lot more research going into that these days, which it needs it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's another
area
that people have shied away from, just because, especially in the UK, we've always had this sort of wariness about death. And I think Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she did a lot to transform public perception of it in terms of her popular book. So it meant that people around the dinner table would actually find it a topic of a lot of interest to actually openly discuss it. But before then, she was saying a lot of the time dying relatives would be, you know, ushered into a room and not really spoken about, not something you want to expose your children to and things like that. I like breaking those boundaries down. In America, they have massive conventions for funerals, things you can buy for the funeral home or for the funeral itself. At my grandmother's funeral, who got me quite interested in ghosts in the first place, I got one of the funeral directors to come behind the curtain at the crematorium after they closed it on the coffin, after everyone had left. And I said, I want a few selfies with it, but I couldn't quite get the angle. So would he take the photo? So I posed with the coffin a few times. And he's like, are you sure? I said, yeah. I love my gran. I got on with her really well. She's about to go through that curtain to someone who's just finished having their sandwich or a cigarette, and they're going to come in and stick her in the furnace. You know, so that's the impersonal bit that's about to happen. So at least I want to be
about the way it goes, in all fairness, Cal.
Well,
yeah,
it is,
right.
but, you know, it's a bit different to burial or the things where you're actually being the last person there. So I thought, you know, I think more and more people should actually try and break those barriers down.
You're not the last person there.
No, admittedly, the gravedigger turns up, but at least you're the last person to put them in the final place.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. Very true. Cal, we are right out of time. We didn't even get to touch on your human sexual behaviour. Well, not yours personally, but people.
They'll take hours.
Cal, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You have been an absolute star, as always.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Anytime, Cal. And for everybody listening, that's been Cal Cooper. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for being in the chat room. Do not forget, there is shows on pretty much every night of the week on Parasearch Radio. You can find us on Spreaker and YouTube, and don't forget to click like, share and subscribe. And from me, that is a good night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.